to individuals, they cannot express themselves freely as they wanted, Mr. Speaker, because we think sexuality is fundamentally important to their lives, because it empowers a relationship with your partners, and because it is important to actually show that this is the fundamental thing, and fundamental natural desire that human beings have. We are very proud to recognize this minority on side prompt. I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. Firstly, why freedom of choice is fundamentally important and why we need to recognize as the government. Secondly, I'm going to talk about issue of consent and why this consent will allow sort of contract between both parties of sexual relationship. But before that, simple model. We're going to allow this in the LDC, all liberal democracies, and we allow this in any sort of relationship, man with man, opposite sex, same sex, anything. And we will allow this sadomasochism for adults, right, above the age of consent. And that is sort of stuff, and sadomasochism is sort of like whipping or hitting your ass and those kind of things. That's fine. So let's go to my substantive, right? Firstly, why freedom of choice is fundamentally important, Mr. Speaker. We think on side's proposition, there's notoriously bad reputation of the government who's failing all the time to actually recognize what is best for individuals to decide and what is individual to have to actually fulfill what is best for them, right? For instance, even if the government is failing to actually impose, for instance, condoms or some sort of insulation to our bedrooms, or the fact that they can't intervene to our bedroom, actually implies that these sort of fields, these sort of private, is dependent upon individuals to actually decide, because these private lives, all the private life, in the private life, what is best can be determined by only individuals. It's not a value position of the government, which they say that is fundamental and most critical to these individuals. But secondly, we think government is always relying on these individuals to decide what is best for them, even in the hard circumstances, right? For instance, when these people, what the government thinks as most rational actors, right? For instance, we are relying on the individuals to actually decide the direction of the country is going by giving them an election on these kind of things. And Mr. Speaker, we think these kind of things can be determined by these individuals, and therefore we need to maximize these choices because they can do so, because they only themselves know the best about their sexuality. So why sex is so important, Mr. Speaker? As I told you in my introduction, sex itself is a natural desire of the human beings, and we think that's the most that is used to actually show your affection towards your partner, right? Because how you treat your partners and how you actually physically interact with your partner matters to building up and empowering this relationship. And we think this sadomasochism is not that different from the sexuality that we have in the status quo, Mr. Speaker. Because people in each role will have some sort of feeling of domination and submission in each lifestyle and sexuality, right, Mr. Speaker? So for instance, you might have to choose, for instance, the east side to actually show some sort of domination towards other partner, and that is allowed. And we say, why hitting or why whipping is not that so much different from these sort of acts, Mr. Speaker. And because, Mr. Speaker, these sort of because every has sort of fetishization of sexuality, right? Because everyone and many other sort of things, for instance, using tools or those kind of things, are allowed in the status quo. We say, why not this? And because everyone and these desires are natural, and because this domination and submission are natural, and to some extent pursued by the individual already in the status quo, we think we should allow this sexuality as well. Yeah.
Do you think if the government should not impose particular types of sexuality, do you want to legalize necrophilia, bestiality, pedophilia, whatever dangerous activity in society?
No, that's completely different, because the actor involved in this is different, right? We are quite happy to concede that sexuality that involves the consent, and each partner's human beings are very important, and we think this is the possible case that every single citizen, every single people involved will be able to make the consent properly. We think that is alright. So why this can be an issue of consent? We think, Mr. Speaker, what we tell you from the side of opposition is that everyone knows about your sexuality, right? Everyone knows what your fetishize, like what you fetishize about. And therefore, you are choosing for your partner to actually make a relationship for the long term and to actually enjoy and keep this kind of relationship in the long term. And therefore, when it is for sort of like involvement of the breaking the contract, for instance, because like sadomasochism involves like some sort of contract, right? You agree to actually hit some sort of things, and you say that to your partner, and submission position person actually feel that is different from what we made, what we considered, what we promised before the actual consent of the sex. They can actually claim that is the wrong thing, that is not the kind of sex that we actually agreed upon, and therefore they can claim so. Mr. Speaker, more importantly, therefore, it is in most cases that to actually make a relationship longer term, we don't think they will do excessive thing that directly harms your partner, right? For instance, breaking balls and these kind of things. Because these kind of harms is not that they want in the in the actual sex. Because what they want is a more moderate domination or moderate submission that is compared with these kind of things. And therefore, what they want is not the absolute pain or, for instance, bleeding or actually, for instance, kicking and those kind of things. What they want is relative difference between the position of each other. And therefore, we don't think there's excessive those kind of things. And therefore, we need to recognize this sort of thing because there is consent, and because there is contract, we hope that they make these sort of things, and because this is some sort of act that they can claim if they break those contract that they made beforehand, be proud to place.
I thank the previous speaker for his speech, and followed by others to speak with their sentiments.
What we heard from that side of the house is that these people have consented to the activity and thus it's okay. But what we're going to bring to you from our side is that this consent is invalid in the first place, and moreover, we're also going to tell you that we need to have these things, we can't legalize it because we're going to lose protection for certain people when it goes over the top. So all my rebuttals will be incorporated into my arguments. So firstly, what we want to tell you is that when an outcome of a certain act goes over the assumed situation of when the consent was made, we believe that that consent becomes invalid. So at first, maybe these partners consented to the SM activities that they are going to do that night or in the future, but we believe that SM activity in itself isn't linear. We don't think the same thing continues on and on and on. We don't think the same things continue for weeks and weeks. We think that it's something that rather gets worse through time, and the reason why it gets worse is simply because people get used to it. After you've done a certain act, for a certain period of time, you're going to get used to the activity. It's going to become really normalized towards the activity. It's going to be normalized, and the fact is, you're going to want more. You're going to want more sexual gratification, which only comes in the context of SM. If you do more harsher, if you do it more stronger, and if you harm that person even more. We think that fundamentally, these people that are consenting to these activities, that are engaging in these activities, are not an expert at sex or at SM. We don't think that they know the limits of the ability. Because firstly, they don't really have enough expert knowledge about it, and secondly, I don't think these people are really experienced in these fields. And we believe on our side that the state is the actor to step in when the citizens or when these people cannot make a rational choice. Moreover, it is important to recognize that these acts, as they have admitted themselves, is something that happens within a closed box, within a black box, and therefore it's important that we make sure that this worsening of the activity doesn't get to the extent that it's rather really harming the people. We need to take a preemptive stance to make sure there are people that do not get harmed. Well, they said that they're not going to harm their partners because they love them. But as I tell you, that the fact is the desire goes over irrationality at one point, at a certain point. That becomes a tipping point at which, if you reach that point, you're still going to want more and more desire, even if you still do love that person. And we think that analysis coming from that side of the house really doesn't stand, because at the end of the day, when you want to have sex, when you want to have SM activities, and when you're already used to the moderate forms of SM activities, your desire is still there. Your desire is inherent within you, and you're still going to want to get gratification, meaning you're going to do it more and more and more harsher, more stronger, more harmful for that person. We think that's bad. We believe also that they said they can claim the thing that's happening to me is not the thing I consented to. It's something very different from what I consented to. So they, apparently under that paradigm you can just say, stop, and then it goes away. But we think it's important to recognize what an SM activity is in the first place. It's an activity where one person has an overriding, strength over the other person. And the role of the person playing M is to say stop in the first place, to say please stop, I don't want this to come to me anymore. That is in the first place the role of the person playing the M. So we think that even if these people were to come up and say, no, I don't want this to happen, this isn't something I consented to, the person who is playing the S is going to assume that it's part of the act itself. Simple logic. Moreover, the second analysis that I bring to you today is that these people, partners, I'm assuming that they're couples and so on, that love each other, and we think that gradually over time, they're going to stop saying, they really want it to stop. They're going to stop accepting the other person if they have this kind of trend about them. If they like SM, we think that the partner, if they love that partner to the extent, then we think they're going to start accepting, meaning that they're going to recognize the fact that they're being treated harshly is the norm. They're not going to think it's something bad being done to them. Which means they're going to irrationally accept what's going to happen to them, what is happening to them, something that's getting far worse day by day. And we think it's the exact same case as domestic violence. They are going to mistake the harshness of the treatment that they get for love itself. And because in this case, the desire of these people goes over the rationality, and because the love goes over rationality, we think in these cases we can clearly say that the consent they made is invalid when all of this is assumed. Therefore, we tell you that even if they may have consented at first, when the act goes over the assumed situation of when they made that consent, we tell you that that consent becomes invalid. Yes?
Naturally, we know not all sex, but death or broken bone or loss of fertility actually breaks your relationship. How can you be so irrational when they are actually doing these things?
I think love makes you irrational. Or, simply, we tell you that they may not go to the extent that they're breaking bones, that they're making, cutting their throats and cutting their wrists, but we still think that it doesn't have to go to that extent. It's still harmful if it's still being done. So the second point I'd like to tell you is that why we need the legal framework of in our society. We tell you that in the status quo, if this activity is done, and if it escalates to the point that victim, but that person wants to sue that person or wants to get help, they can do so using the legal framework, and thus they can get compensation, they can get help through the legal process. However, off the plan, they're not going to be able to do so, simply because the courts cannot distinguish what is okay and what is not okay. Because at the end of the day, they're going to really legalize all sorts of sex, meaning they can't really sue the person, and the victim still stays the victim with the harms intact within them. Meaning they have no protection at all, and in the context, if it is a woman or a man, we think they're rather financially dependent on that person, or especially in the case of a woman who is comparatively physically weaker, we think it's going to create a situation where they're stuck inside that situation without any way to solve that problem. And the third point I'd like to bring to you is that when an individual choice hurts society in itself, we limit it. When it has negative externalities, we do limit it. As in the case of bestiality, as in the case of necrophilia, or sex with children. We think this is the exact same thing, because it's creating the harm of the humans being degraded, of human beings degraded. We think after planet is going to normalize these sorts of situations. We think it's bad. So for all these reasons, we do not want SM activity in our life. Thank you.
I thank the previous speaker for his speech. I call upon DPM to speak within 7 minutes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, according to the entire speech of legal opposition, I understand that how the consent is not credible. But however, I didn't understand why those masochism itself is bad, Mr. Speaker. We believe in the consent is so necessary and consent is credible. We think it is good for them to take it, for the minority to take it, for everyone to take it. We are very proud to propose. So in my speech, I will explain two issues to talk about. Firstly, I'm going to explain how this proposal will practically improve the social norm, because we think under the status quo that those sadomasochism is actually treated as taboo. We think its perception will change by taking this proposal. But secondly, I'm going to explain how this how the value that some people have, especially important in the case of sadomasochism. But third, before that, rebuttals. Firstly, they say, is that consent is not credible because they're getting used to it. We think it's funny because that proves that those people who are actually in the masochism feel nothing about pragmatic harm, right? They didn't feel anything about how harmful it is. We think in that sense it is not harmful at all because we think that those getting used to it is not a reason to ban them. For example, what they are trying to do is to ban the club activity, Mr. Speaker. The process that you proceed, the practice in basketball, at first time it's really hard. But secondly, I think that they proceeded that those practice is not so harmful because they are actually getting used to it. So, however, what they want to do is that it is harmful when the other people say it. So it is so harmful and we just ban it. It is not the way that we have to proceed, right? So we believe not getting used to it is not the reason to ban blatantly things. Secondly, they say that the first choice is actually in the case because it is something in somewhere there's a line that those, especially women maybe, cannot be acceptable. Really, we think in majority cases, those process is not something that actually force you a relationship. Between those majority cases, we think that those line is in that relationship, not marriage or something like that. Which means if you are to start feel it's unacceptable, you have a vast majority room to reject it and separate relationship and end its relationship. Thirdly, they say love is blind. So it is harmful. Credibility is not there. It is not unique at all, ladies and gentlemen. If the love is blind and it is so problematic, you have to ban the sex itself. Maybe those people are not consenting to sex itself, but since the love is blind, they're actually being patient or being forced to sex. However, we think if the love is blindness of love is so problematic, we have to all ban all the relationship that is based on love. So let's go to the first issue. Fourthly, lastly, they say the court cannot make credible decision after making a proposal. However, this is not true because when those victims start to say it's violence, not love, the court will be enough to judge this is bad and violent and it is an illegal thing. We think that after making proposal, nothing will be harmful. So let's go to the second issue about how this proposal, will improve social norms. So, under the status quo, we think the reason why the majority think it's abnormal is not because this is unnatural, but rather society is treated as taboo. It is why we think the same example is actually in a gay marriage or a gay habitat, right? In the previous era, those gay marriage or being gay is actually taboo, even though it's not natural. It is natural. Sorry, Max. You have sex life and you have sadomasochism. Although you have sex life to some degree, and each individual has sadomasochism. although the degree will differ from case to case. So what is the point? Well, because the majority will think it is abnormal and acceptable, those minority have no place to speak up their own identity, which is really harmful, especially when sexual relationship or sexual preferences deeply connected to their own identity and to their own life. So what will happen after Reagan's proposal? We think that firstly, the society has got more tolerant to sadomasochism. Firstly, let's go. But before that, yeah, Henry, go on.
So who are these minorities that practice S&M all the time that you're trying to protect? Because you're not contextualizing your characters at all in today's debate. What kind of people are you trying to protect today?
So we're trying to protect everyone who wants masochism. We don't need a characterization of this debate. We are going to allow the all people who want this sexuality to actually conduct it. So let's go to the African proposal. So first reason why we think society can be tolerate more is because industry will react up. Because the production SM or any kind of media is got more friendly to SM or sadomasochism. We think it's really good. But secondly, more importantly, the people have a chance to claim on it, ladies and gentlemen. When those people is actually recognized as being normal and being one of the types of sexuality, that those people will no more hesitate to actually release their sexuality. We think this is good. Exactly the same way, we are actually have a chance now to say about their girlfriend or to say about boyfriend. It's samely and exactly the same way it is important. So why this value or whatever, it's important. So we think the sex is actually should be made in order to deepen the relationship as much as possible. And for that reason, we think the point is because the sexual relationship is actually make those relationships more close. So the fact that they cannot do your preferences, you cannot exercise your preferences, is actually harm to the relation itself. Because those people will no longer be able to feel that they are connected with your partner. So we think that's harmful, and not like the bestiality or like pedophilia. We think this relationship should have been kept. Thank you.
I thank the previous speaker for his speech. I follow up on the dialogue to speak with in 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen in this House. They fail to recognize the intrinsic nature of S&M that we have described so far, ladies and gentlemen. It has inherently escalating, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the outcome will be disproportionate, which overrides the initial consent, ladies and gentlemen. The initial anticipation people have, and the actual outcome is totally different, ladies and gentlemen. We think in this particular context that initial consent is not valid enough. We are very proud to oppose the motion before the House today. As a second speaker from this side of the House, I'm going to talk about 4 issues. I'm going to ventilate 4 issues. Firstly, the mindset of people. Secondly, the issue of contract. What should be the criteria for that? Thirdly, the issue of victims of this kind of violent activities. Fourthly, how should we maximize the happiness in the context of love affairs? Fifthly, the mindset of people. The logic coming from that side of the House is very simple. Gay marriage used to be minority, but we have changed the mindset of people because we have legalized that by legislation. The legalization of gay marriage does not cause any external harm to parties involved, ladies and gentlemen. Just because you legalize the gay marriage, people involved in that affairs have no concrete harm, ladies and gentlemen. No concrete physical assault, no concrete physical harm, ladies and gentlemen. But if we legalize this kind of violent activity, it will surely hurt the either side. That's what Prime Minister has improved due to the escalation process. I will deepen that point later in my speech. Therefore, we don't think it's a good idea to legalize domestic violence because it obviously hurts the either side, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. If you really want to say minorities' rights should be expanded, why not legalize necrophilia? Why not legalize the activity in both domestic violence? Why not legalize pedophilia or bestiality? The only response is actors are so different. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you why even if the actors are different, still this is not a valid choice for individuals to maximize their happiness. Second issue,
contract, ladies and gentlemen. Besides my partner's analysis, I'm going to give you 4 criteria to decide what is validity of contract. Firstly, if the information is asymmetric, if there's imbalance of information, we think that kind of contract is not valid at all, ladies and gentlemen. Please imagine the situation. In a relationship, one party has experienced so many times this under practice. I don't think there is people exist in this group. We assume there are in cases, ladies and gentlemen, the other party doesn't have any experiences and any knowledge about the risk that practice of S&M has, ladies and gentlemen. In this case, the other side has overriding information and absolute knowledge, which these people can easily exploit the other side. These people can take advantage of the lack of information of the other side. When there is huge disparity of information, we think that kind of contract is not valid. In this particular case, we think it's applicable because of the discrepancy of experience of the party involved in this practice. But secondly, if there is a structural power imbalance, the contract is not valid. For example, let's assume there's a rich man, there are poor women, ladies and gentlemen. This is the offensive analysis. I understand, but ladies and gentlemen, we can't deny these cases. But fact here is a weaker parties. For example, if one person is financially dependent on the other side or physically dependent on the other side, these parties can't actually deny or refuse whatever order that the stronger one says, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the weaker party is structured systematically being exploited by this kind of in relationship with structural power imbalance. We think in this particular case, no thank you. We think this kind of contract is not valid at all. Thirdly, as my partner has already shown you, the rationality might be the criteria. When you are drunken, when you are children, you are not allowed to sign any kind of contract. In this particular case, we think people are highly emotional and visceral, ladies and gentlemen. Because, even if at the first time, at the beginning, you think you are harmed by your partners. After the practice, if your partner says, I'm sorry, I really, love you, so please forgive me. Maybe this kind of, visceral reaction will close out the rationality of the individual. In this particular case, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think both sides have enough capacity of rationality to make a valid decision of their own outcome and their actions. Fourthly, when the outcome is over initial consent, when the outcome is beyond the control of the initial anticipation, within contract is not valid at all, ladies and gentlemen. At the initial consent, maybe you don't consent to die, but we have precedents in history, ladies and gentlemen. Because this is measuring the law, she knows many precedents about S&M, its prosecution and indictment. One couple used to regularly practice S&M, then she stopped saying no. I feel pain, ladies and gentlemen. At the beginning, she said, it's so painful, so please moderate it more. But when time goes on, she stopped saying that, ladies and gentlemen. She get used to it. As a result, that female died, and the partner didn't notice that. He actually killed them during the course of sexual practice, ladies and gentlemen. That's the precedent we have. In this particular case, the initial consent to the practice of S&M and the outcome, that is death, is totally disproportionate, ladies and gentlemen. When the outcome is, beyond your initial consent, we think contract is invalid. I will take you now. Okay, I will take you later. The next issue is about the issue of victims, ladies and gentlemen. The fact here is under their paradigm, because this kind of practice, biosexual practice, is legalized, ladies and gentlemen. The victims with a lose allegation or means to, prosecute or fight against the other side. I will take you now.
So, your entire argument based on the assumption in every case is those who were stronger in society as S and the weaker as M.
But that's what SM is, ladies and gentlemen. That one party is playing the stronger side, the other side is intentionally playing the weaker side. Right? That's the inherent characteristic of something. That's how we escalate, ladies and gentlemen. Right? Because if you say, please stop me, I feel so painful, the other side thinks that's the role of M, so I should need to do it. Right? Therefore, we think this kind of violence will be perpetuated in the future. That's totally harmful. But under our paradigm, if in the status quo, if the practice of S&M is so harmful, so humane, so atrocious, ladies and gentlemen, the people have the methods to fight against wife and husband throughout the prosecution or indictment. This is a legal framework to help these kind of victims, ladies and gentlemen. Even in the case of domestic violence, many females are in torment and suffering and excruciated under the harsh condition because these people, are actually harmed by the other side. But because it's a legal framework, these people can't actually prosecute the man. These people can actually sue the man, ladies and gentlemen. This kind of legal mechanism is what we will lose under their proposal. There is no particular engagement from that side of the house. We are very proud to propose it.
I thank the previous speaker for his speech. I call upon government to deliver the speech within 7 minutes. Here.
Do you know, the sex is not an occasion where you lose all rationality in that, right? That is why you are not cutting your penis. That is why you're not inserting the fire stick in the vagina, right? Sex is not an occasion where you lose all rationality, and that is something that is what they have never proved to us. Sex is always that occasion where you lose all rationality. That has never been proved by us. There are two issues in this. Firstly, choice of these people stands or not, and this is the biggest issue, and I will spend too much time on this. But secondly, practical consequence of this proposal, because we just cannot make judgment as to which is degree, which is SM, which we think that is just ridiculous. But we say recognition, progressive, and this is beneficial for all the people who prefer SM. So, first choice stands or not. Fundamentally, they said the harm itself is really dangerous, and there are 5 or 6 supporting the reasons why we have to crack down this. So first reason is that the normalized relationship of violence radicalizes violence, and that is something like false consciousness or something. But our response is this. You know the broken bone or severe injury or death or loss of fertility directly breaks your relationship, right? That is why, for example, you do not cut the, as I said, boy's penis, or you don't insert something into the vagina so excessively and so violently, right? You know that this is so dangerous conduct, right? You know that excessive violence must lead to the broken relationship of you. And as long as the main purpose of your sexual conduct is to make and keep relationship, you don't actually so excessively do these so dangerous things. So secondly, there is no knowledge for these people. 2 responses. Firstly, they know enough. Because bloodshed or blue face because of choking is not just danger about sex, but it's danger of life. You naturally know that this is not just about sex. This is just about life, right? So you know that if your partner is shedding blood, it is so dangerous. It is really dangerous situation, and it can shock you, and that can prevent you from more violence. And secondly, and you are going to do SM in the first place, right? Which you naturally know involves violence, thereby dangerous. If you go beyond pay, that it is so dangerous. You know that, and this natural knowledge of danger of violence rationally prevents you from conducting excessive torturous things, even if you are experienced or not experienced. And we say in this case, the initial consent can be regarded can also be regarded enough, right? It can be regarded as something most precious when you are conducting SM between you and your partner. And this knowledge can prevent you rationally from excessive conduct of violence. The third thing they said is that love makes you irrational. So 2 responses. Firstly, as I said, sex is not an occasion where you lose all rationality. For example, first sex might be painful for ladies, and the boys can notice it and try to care for your partner. That is totally the rational case, even if you are involved in the sexual act. And secondly, the purpose is quite clear. It is, as my Prime Minister told you, The purpose of this sexual conduct is moderate pain, which can make you feel that you are in relative position of power. But we emphasize that it is not absolute pain, which leads you to death. And because you know that if you kill your partner, and if you severely injure your partner, you can no longer enjoy rights, no longer enjoy relationship, no longer enjoy many nights with your partner. Right? The purpose of SM, which initially recognized and consent to. This is the purpose of SM, which you initially recognize and consent to. But fourth thing they said is that physical harm in general is really harmful and it is so dangerous. Firstly, not so harmful as I said, because you are rational enough. But secondly, why do we care about just physical harm? Right? Mental influence of dogging style might also be a form of pain to you. And it is consented and it is allowed now, as my Prime Minister told you, never responded to. And where's the distinction between this and other form of sexual conduct? As my partner question, there is no response to this. No, the only one response, one response existing. Only one response is that, then what about pedophilia, or necrophilia, or bestiality, those kind of so immoral sexual things. So difference is, we can never confirm in these bestiality or pedophilia cases, even initial consent, when people in the room start to have sex, right? This is the difference. So, before moving on to the next session, yes.
In the case of pedophilia, necrophilia, people can actually have a contract or consent. In the case of cannibalism, people have a contract, but still that's not allowed because of its disproportionate outcome, which overrides initial anticipation of the parties involved in the contract.
Cannibalism is a really controversial issue, as you can see in the back-hand side. So this is really, really controversial thing, and this can be the reason why you hate this sexual conduct of SM. So this is the thing they said. It's a power imbalance and the dependence, economic dependence. But that is not relevant to this case because that is just rape, where your consent doesn't exist in the first place. It's not involved even initial consent. That is totally different. And finally, they said imposition of a stronger and weaker relationship. So they forgot that this is just virtual and non-real relationship, and it's just conducted in a small room. It doesn't embody real discrimination in our society, and that is why the imposition of strong weak relationship is not so much problematic. So we told you that true analysis. Firstly, we cannot make judgment as to what sexuality is good for you. The preference cannot be controlled by the government. No response. And it is for, secondly, it is for making better relationship based upon best satisfaction for you and for your partner. No response. So, second issue, so quickly, practical consequence. So one response from outside of us to their case, court cannot make judgment as to which is DV and which is SM. Our response is, if victim is no longer tolerant with excessive violence, the victims can say in the court, I was beaten up not because of SM, but because of violence, domestic violence. It's clear statement of getting hurt without consent, and courts can take it into account. But my partner, Shui Soju, the recognition of this special preference that's expressed in our society, that can be a recognition of the valid form of preference which is still existing in our society. That is good for people preferring SM. We are very proud to propose.
I thank the previous speaker for his speech. I follow up on the speech within 7 minutes.
Thank you, sir. At the end of this debate, there's one thing I can say. All three members of the government side today have been ignoring the nature of S&M. Either they're ignoring it because they don't want to face it, or they're ignoring it because they have a boring sex life. So, basically, their assumption throughout the entire debate today was that it's a natural activity, it's consented, it's just an extension of sex. Now, all three of our speakers have consistently No, S&M is a practice on its own, right? No matter how much the sex is better with the S&M there, it doesn't matter because the consent there is not valid. S&M is not sex. Even if there was an initial consent that they would start the S&M, the consent at the end of the S&M itself is actually surpassed and it's not valid anymore because the activity itself, because of the nature itself, inherently escalates. And basically government is okay with S&M only because it's consented, right? And I'll give you a lot of reasons, basically 3 reasons of why it's not consented. First of all, in an instance where the woman or the man itself won't listen to the person saying stop. Now, this has been presented in many, many precedents, many past cases, in which the victim actually dies because it's normalized in their daily routine where they have fun having a dominatrix sort of situation in which one side completely sort of abuses that person and it's fun and they don't say stop and they don't want to kill that person but they happen to, right? This is what's so problematic about the nature of S&M, right? And second of all, they won't say stop on their own. Now, basically, what happens is during, for example, soft SM, when they're doing it on a regular basis, for example, they handcuff them to the bed, or they start tying them with the neckties, and they make it stronger and stronger and stronger, and finally, at some point, because it became a ritual, stop laughing, it was normalized. It was normalized, right? So, they didn't say when to stop, because one day, it goes too far, one day, they cannot breathe anymore, they die. That's why S&M is so dangerous, and we don't believe government is in the place to encourage such a practice that has all of these dangers and harms in it. If you guys have been listening to our past 2 speeches, you would have known that there's all this danger in here. Are these instances completely consented? No. Thirdly, they don't notice the violence because it's really similar to a case of DV, right? It's a forced choice. Because you love that person, because that person likes to sort of stop you from breathing for a little bit, because that's a good part of your daily routine, you don't tell them to stop. And we believe that's dangerous. Because all sorts, the precedents themselves actually tell us that it's an extremely dangerous practice. Okay?
So, just because it may escalate, why you cut this chance from the very beginning?
Okay, thank you. So basically, from the beginning, you've been saying we want to maximize these people's happiness, right? And basically what we've been saying is that when there is a consent, throughout the entire practice of what's going to happen, that's fine. But because of the nature, because we cannot stop it, because there is no end, because these people are not professionals, it doesn't stop in that state, right? And especially in the cases of necrophilia and cannibalism, etc., there is consent. There is consent to have sex with that person after they die. But when the outcome is disproportionate, like these 2 cases, we can limit it, right? We can limit it in our society, no matter how much it fulfills the happiness of that one individual. And that's what's so important, because the nature of S&M is what you guys have been ignoring. Okay, and furthermore, the fact of the matter is, I asked them, you're protecting minorities, who are these minorities, right? And they said, well, everybody who wants to do S&M. When we're protecting minorities, though, it's because their values, their morals, do not have a harmful effect on the society. That's when we are allowed to allow these ideas and ideologies from these minorities into our societies. Examples, gay marriage, sort of working women, all sorts of minorities exist. We have made it clear that there's huge harm under the status quo of S&M practice in itself. Maybe, yes, if you're extremely rational all the time and you know exactly what you're doing and you know exactly when to stop, S&M is fine. But most people in our situation, or anybody who even tries it, does not work that way. And why does this happen? Because what we're doing, if we legalize it, it's basically saying the government is encouraging it as a valid activity, right? Citizens will be driven to try it. We've been telling you this from our first speaker, by the way. If the government allows you to do something like that, you want to try it, and at that point you're very, very inexperienced, right? Which brings up even more risk of that person changing it into a dangerous activity. And this is what the harm, this is the harm that we want to keep away from our society today. And furthermore, the issue of the legal frameworks. Basically the government said, well, the court doesn't have the capability to tell, right? Yes, they do, because they can tell what instances are DV, what instances are violence, abuse, child abuse. They can do all this. Why not S&M? Under the status quo, too, the mechanism of victims right now, they're able to go to court, right? If they're doing S&M and it escalates and they want to sue that person, the existence of the legal framework under the status quo is a huge influence for these people. But after this plan is taken, the legal framework goes away, right? So even if the activity escalates, they cannot go to the court and sue them because the court cannot make the distinguishment of what is okay and what is not because it's legal, right? Because it's legal, the court cannot say, yes, this is okay, and yes, no, this is not okay. There's no protection for these people, for these minorities, as you've been seeing, especially these weak women that do not have the physical power to say no because of all of these invalid choices I've been talking to you about, right? This is an extreme problem that will happen. Furthermore, we're not protecting the people who are deliberately breaking the bones, as the last whip speaker tried to talk to you about. Yes, if someone deliberately breaks your bone while you happen to have all your clothes off, no, that's not S&M. Go to the court and sue them. That's not sex at all. And if, for example, that happens, we're protecting these that do not consider it as an act of pain. That's the people that we are trying to protect today. They're not considering it as an act of pain from the beginning, but it happens to go on that far. It happens to end up in a situation that's terrible for that person because the effect happens to be that way in a situation that they did not anticipate. And that is what's so terrible. That is what we need to protect because these people do not know what they're doing. No matter how rational that person is, no one at all knows how far something will escalate like that, especially when you're dealing with ropes and handcuffs and all sorts of tools that you usually do not handle. And we believe, even for this reason alone, we have won this debate. Thank you.
I have the previous speaker for a speech. I call upon Elo to deliver the flash speech to the podium. Thank you.
In a debate where the government side were really obsessed with doggy style and when the opposition side was against rape itself, the thing is they have clearly missed the problem itself. The fact is, they don't consider these acts as being violence at first when they consent to it, but the act gradually gets worse and worse and worse without realizing that it is violence being done to them and they happen to end up dying. That is the characterization we gave you from the start. That is the problem that we want to solve or we want to save from happening, and that's something they have clearly misunderstood. We told you, or the Deputy Prime Minister Shun said at the start of his speech, it should be an option in 30 if the consent is credible. Meaning, if we can prove on our side of the house that this consent is not credible in the first place, then we win this debate. We take this debate using the criteria they have given us. The thing is, we tell you the consent is invalid. We have told you from the start. Firstly, we told you that the consent is different from the outcome. The outcome that happens out of this activity, the harms that come out of this activity, is different from the one that these people assumed when they entered the consent itself. We told you that SM activity in itself intrinsically isn't something linear, it's something that goes worse and worse and worse because people get used to it afterwards, because people still want sexual gratification, even if they do get used to it, even if they do keep going. And we told you how it's going to create a situation where the people are going to do these activities much harsher and much stronger. No real engagement from that side of the house. Moreover, intrinsically, about the SNM, we told you in the first place, they won't listen to these to the people saying stop, because it's part of the activity in itself. We told you when it is a part of the activity, we don't see any reason why that person or the one doing the whipping is going to stop doing the whipping just because that person says stop. It's a part of the activity. Secondly, we told you that because of love, because they feel an intimate relation with that person who they've engaged in the activity with, we told you gradually they will stop saying the word stop in itself because they start to accept these things being done to them as being the norm inside that relationship. They become irrational in this aspect, meaning they become irrational without realizing the violence, the harm that is being done to them by the actor. We tell you in that instance, we have to prevent it from happening because the people are not rational in these cases. And moreover, we told you about domestic violence and how it's similar to that case, where the people who are getting this done to them are going to think that the harshness of the whipping or the things that are being done to them is the same as the love that's been given by that person as well. We told you how they're going to misperceive the concept itself, we told you how that's going to be harmful because it creates a situation where they're rather not going to stay strong at all. We told you in all these aspects, the consent in itself, even though it may be valid at the start of the consent, at the time when they make that consent itself, we tell you after time, as time goes on, as the activity gets worse and worse and worse, all these things come up, making the consent that was valid at first invalid at the end. And we tell you when it is invalid, using Chun's criteria he gave us, we have no reason to take this plan. We have no reason to make it illegitimate at all, because the consent in itself is invalid, meaning the outcome is disproportionate. People die out of it without realizing the harm to itself, meaning we cannot allow the government to have it as a legal option for the people. The second thing we told you was about the necessity of these legal frameworks in society itself, how after the plan, the people are not really going to be able to speak up and get protection, something that exists in status quo. The important thing to know, and the only thing you have to know, is that they're going to lose protection, and that's why we oppose the motion. Thank you.
I thank the previous speaker for his speech. Let's call upon the Prime Minister again to the Prime Minister with their 4 minutes. Get here.
Finally, on the opposition side, they never ever told us how it is harmful in the first place. Right? They are certain it is the nature of sadomasochism. They go extend, they go radicalize. And how would that happen? We told you that's the reason why they will not go further down the line that they've drawn, right? Mr. Speaker, in today's debate, we think that what they missed is types of consent that we are talking about and types of harm that we talked about. And because of misconception and misunderstanding of the opposition side, we think we are winning this debate. To sum up this debate, two issues to talk about. Firstly, whether there's consent and why it is important. Secondly, why there is practical benefit for these minorities, and that violence case doesn't exist under our model. So firstly, about the issue of consent, Mr. Speaker. We told you from side proposition, there is, before you actually go into sex with sadomasochism, right? You make a rule. You make a rule to, for instance, this is the extent that you made. And we told you from side, from the first of the beginning of this debate, right? And therefore, you make a rule, and this sort of, when you tell that when the action of itself went too far than that, you can claim that it's wrong, that it was not that things we agreed upon, and therefore you can claim that. And they told us that it's not rational. That doesn't prove that it's rationality. They told us many rubbish reasons, right? So let's deal with it one by one. So my partner told you the knowledge and irrationality of love is not matter. Why is that? Knowledge, who is expert in sex in the first place, right? We don't think that matters. But secondly, we think when you have sex, even if you're not expert, you know that what harms your partner, right? What kills your partner, and what sort of asphyxiation will lead to these sort of death or those kind of extreme cases. And therefore, we think that there is no necessity of the special cases that we talked about and about irrationality. We told you if you think just love is blind and love makes you all irrational, you can't actually consent to have sex in the first place, right? Why does that matter? We think irrationality exists in the sexual field, even if you are in love, because there are something that you have agreed upon cannot be broken, because that will lead to the breaking of contract, right? Because if you are to actually avoid these cases, you will be at the end breaking the relationship itself, and therefore we think they are not irrational, Mr. Speaker. And they talked about the harm is too great from our sadomasochism without any explanation of how they lead to this escalation, right? Mr. Speaker, because the knowledge of the existence of these kind of sort of harm or the extreme cases exist, does prevent these these kind of extreme cases in the first place. But why? Like on-side opposition, we didn't hear that just because you used it, more harm will create better relationship. How would that lead to better relationship? They never ever explained on their side of the house. So at the end of the day, we don't think there's like the harm that will exist on our side of the house that will excessively damage the partner. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, because these contracts will be made, and if the partner is breaking the contract, because you can claim that this is the wrong utterances by like password or message or anything that we agreed upon, we think evade these kind of things. And therefore, because the extreme cases they all focused upon will not happen, and because this minority sexuality is so important that which they consider, we think we think this is superior on this side of the house. But secondly, about legal framework and that sort of thing, we think that is already cleared up by Kato. Because if you are asphyxiated by someone and you actually that leads to kill somebody, like court recognizes that as violence, right? What is so bad on our side of the house? So for those two reasons, because this sexuality is really important, because there is consent, because we don't go excessive, we proud to propose.